All right, we're live. Welcome to the Liquid Swan channel. Today we're sponsored by George Bagby and his Tallman Books. You can find him on Twitter at Tallman Books, and he has his links there for different books if you want. If you're interested in like the Southern story, the Confederacy and stuff, and Robert E. Lee, go check him out. He's a great guy. So support our friends. And now that that's over with, may I introduce Black Horse? How are you doing?
Not too bad. How about you, Mr. Swan?
Oh, it's hot and sweaty over here, but I'm handling it.
Yes, we've had our we're in the middle of our mandatory 4 weeks of summer, so
Yeah, true. Well, we get 6 weeks here because it's the Hawaii
well,
of Canada.
well, you're in the soft country, right?
Yeah, exactly. We don't get any snow. Like we don't get any snow at all. Maybe we get and when I was a kid, we literally got none. So this climate
Yeah,
change stuff is total crap. Like we got no snow when I was a kid. It was just hot all the time.
yeah.
We get rain obviously, but then the winter these last couple of years, let's say since I've been an adult, I get like a foot of snow. Like in the last 10 years, I've been getting a foot of snow a year, which is insane for us. When I was a
Well,
kid, I'd be begging for that, but nowadays
I,
I'm like, this sucks.
I mean, I've never been in BC when it's not been cloudy and rainy, so
Oh yeah,
my personal impression is that that's just how it is.
yeah. You know they say about BC. It stands for bring cash.
There you go. There you go.
So you need it for the umbrellas. Um, Anyways, let's get started. I got some questions for you if you don't mind.
Sure.
All right, first one up is I know who you are, but maybe people in the audience don't. I hope they do, but maybe they don't. Who are you? And don't dox yourself.
Yeah, so um, I've been kicking around the reactionary right for quite a long time. First as an observer for many years, going back into the Obama era. Maybe I started I started becoming interested in reactionary politics in maybe 2010,
Oh,
2011.
oh, that's quite early.
Um, but I didn't really get involved in terms of participation until so. My view for a long period of time was that parallelism was the future for thriving communities in Canada.
Hmm.
Um, and that view was very directly challenged during COVID because certainly in Ontario, we had done lots of work on parallel like Christian schools, Christian universities, um, and then it turns out that when the sovereign decides that they're going to take exceptional action,
Hmm.
all of your efforts at parallelism get tested in a very hard way. Um, and that experience really made me kind of check a lot of my priors about what might be required in order to kind of get through the moment that we're all trying to get through. So I started to
Hmm.
get a little bit more active in dialogue at that point, and I began to began to appear on podcasts and began to write a little bit on Twitter. So if you want to
Mm.
find my work, I've got a Substack, the Red Ensign, and I've got my Twitter account, and my by trade I work in the financial industry, and so I appear pretty regularly with Radlib to do our Econ Minis stuff where we talk about markets and economics.
Well,
Um,
how did you get involved with Red Lib and that?
well, he made a mistake in one of his early shows,
Oh yeah.
and I dropped into his. It was a mistake about how bond pricing works, and I dropped into his Discord and explained it to him, and he said, "Well, it, the explanation was sophisticated enough that he invited me to come on and talk about a few things." So,
Well, that's pretty cool. And you and your family's been in Canada for quite a few generations.
long time we're descendants of loyalists. So for those with not a without much understanding of Canadian history, during the American Revolution, um, there's a split between segments of the American population, and
Hmm.
the rebels were not very kind to those who sided with the British Crown. And after the British Crown lost the American Revolution, um, these people were resettled, and they were resettled really in two main areas. First, in what's now the Maritimes in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And then the British Crown bought a long stretch of land from about Kingston to Sarnia from the Massasauga Native tribe and created Upper Canada as a resettlement location for loyalists. And my family, many of my ancestors were loyalists.
That's very interesting. I've been able to trace my family quite far back, but it all traces back to the States at some point, or Europe. But
Well, if
uh,
you look at, there's a very interesting piece of Canadian history. So during the
mhm.
War of 1812, the American general stated that conquering Canada would simply be a matter of marching. And one of the reasons why he thought this is because Upper Canada was populated about 80% by first generation American migrants at the time.
Mhm.
Because in the years immediately following the war, you had an incredibly porous border and a lot more Americans than loyalist settlers. So Americans just kind of streamed across the border. This was the case for a really long time in the early history of Canada.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of the border towns got their start as smuggling towns at the time, smuggling farm equipment to get away from the British tariffs against the American colonies.
Oh, that's that makes sense. Like that kind of went up until like my great grandfather was in like the Vancouver and Seattle area.
Yeah.
He was the one from Scotland, and he would drive a. I can't. I think he was before he went to the war. He was like driving a taxi cab in between, like delivering booze because there was some sort of tax difference, and he was trying to take advantage of that.
Well, for a
Um,
long time, Canada was during Prohibition in the States. Canada was a smuggling location for booze into the U.S., which is
yeah,
why whiskey's Canadian Club is such a big brand in whiskey. But
yeah.
but on the but before that, in the first half of the 19th century, uh, the smuggling went the other way because of the imperial preference tariffs for that forced Canadian farmers to buy their equipment from Great Britain.
Hmm.
It turns out it's a really long way to ship farm equipment
Yeah,
from Britain to central Canada. So
yeah. Make the price prohibitive.
yeah,
That's interesting. So I'll move on to the next question here. Now that we're done where we are, so what do you do? So you've already talked about working with RadLab. Uh, you work in the financial industry. What else are you up to, or what have you done? Because you were doing something before, I think, with the Beowulf organization.
yeah. So um, I've been interested in after 2020. I got quite interested in uh, organization in kind of the deep right and found and translating what I saw as a lot of online energy into something productive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I led something called the Beowulf Foundation for a couple of years. Um, I'm still involved as a I'm still involved with it extensively. And the
Mm-hmm.
goal of the Beowulf Foundation is to translate kind of online combination of online academics and online energy into useful political networks that are productive in the long term. And there's kind of there's a few vehicles through which the Beowulf Foundation seeks to accomplish that. One is the basket weaving project, which is a social networking project designed to take online connections among people with similar ideas and translate them into real relationships and real networks um, that kind of form the foundation on which to build.
Mm-hmm.
The next step up from that was the events that we were sort of integral in establishing. Um, we've got there's the Skilding conference in the UK that's coming up very shortly, which was a descendant of this project.
The
There are
Witten.
yes, the Witten,
Yeah.
but there have been a number of other locations in which we've done events at different scales, and there's quite a bit coming down that pipeline in the future um,
Mm-hmm.
as we start to look at a lot of that for Beowulf is now focused in Europe at the moment, um, but we'll kind of see how things evolve over time.
I know there's one coming up in November. I'm going to go to in Portland.
Yes.
and basically through Beowulf, I believe.
Well, yeah, so this is what I mean by events at different scales. So,
Hmm.
like out in the West Coast, there isn't enough scale to do a full scale conference. So what we've done is basket weaving scale events where it's like 30 or 40 guys for an evening, and it's a great opportunity to connect with other people to form those kinds of networks that you can build on,
Hmm.
right? A lot of uh, a lot of I mean the audience we're drawing from are overwhelmingly very intelligent young men um, who are very likely to have bright futures of one kind or another in front of them, um, and putting them together, I think that's a very important service to
Hmm.
building power in the long term.
It's true. Like I find when I go to these meetups in the States, and I haven't been to the European one yet, but there's someone you can like, if they're with the organization that you can kind of rely on them.
Yeah, well, and we do a pretty good job. Um, we have a number of tactics for filtering people. So we do a pretty good job of trying to keep the quality high,
Hmm.
and it continues to be a focus for us um, because, like, the biggest issue when forming networks that you hope to be kind of foundational is that not only do you have to be able to rely on people in terms of just like baseline competence, but you also have to rely on their stability over a long period of time. The worst problem with translating online relationships into real life is that um, particularly young people tend to go in and out of, they tend to believe one thing today and another thing tomorrow and another thing the day after that because their beliefs aren't really, they're not anchored in kind of a social foundation. So
Hmm.
they're almost like a fashion choice. Um, and obviously, you can't work with anyone in the long term whose ideas are a fashion choice.
Hmm. Fashion changes every couple months.
Yeah, well, and you go and expose yourself because, I mean, we're both Canadians. Our politics are fundamentally illegal in this country. Um,
It's true.
so you don't want to have people like that in your organization. It's just not um, it's not conducive to any kind of long term success.
Yeah. Well, and there's a and that reminds there's another event in kind of up in California. I think it's Sacramento coming up in this early January, I believe. Unfortunately, I can't go because it's when I'm in Brazil, but that's going to be huge. I think if it's anything like we suspect might be. But
Well,
again, that's through Beowulf as well.
the Beowulf Foundation is a pretty large organization, and we've done a lot of. I don't think very many people appreciate how much work that organization has done to kind of move forward the cause of building these networks that people can then build on, and also kind of putting the foundational the tools for getting connected together into place and maintaining them, and doing all the sort of baseline quality control to make sure that the people who are organizing this are people that you can rely on. So
Mhm. Yeah, I can definitely see a network of certain nodes that are really putting the work in and things together. And that's just what I see. There's a
yeah,
bunch of stuff in the background I have never seen, and I see it once in a while pop up. I'm like, oh, I see, and I can see things moving, and I'm like, oh wow, okay, I didn't even know. Uh, so even though I'm like, I wouldn't say I'm like super involved, but I'm trying to be there where I
well,
can.
and that's kind of the it's a volunteer organization. People do what they can. You
Yeah,
know, times kind of things change over time. That's just the way that goes. Huh?
exactly. Yeah, it's more about the endurance. Like if you can do. I like to say like get as many plates as you can spinning as a young person, and just like keep them all spinning. And if something falls, then maybe it just wasn't as important as the other ones, and then just keep going with those and seeing what you're capable of. Right, like a lot of people they sort of like get into the video game mindset
Yeah.
and or stuff like that.
Well, I mean,
Um,
one of the lessons I learned. So one of the other things that people may or may not know about me. I've run I've run a business for a while, a business that was a very small business when I partnered with my father, but I've also founded a couple of other businesses in my life.
Hmm.
Um, and one of the mistakes that people make in entrepreneurship is the belief that if something, I call it the one swing hypothesis,
Hmm.
right? That you're going to take all of your energy and all of your effort and you're going to focus it exclusively on one thing. And this thing, I have to find a way to make this thing work. And
Hmm.
the reality is, most things that you try in a kind of entrepreneurial world mode, well more than half of them aren't going to work.
Hmm.
And being able to kind of put enough in to figure out whether it's going to work and being able to put it away if it doesn't is a really important skill if you want to make something like that successful.
It sounds kind of like writing, like because I do a lot of writing, and often I'll be writing something, and I'm like, okay, it's crap. I just throw it out,
Yeah.
then move on to the other project I have going. Um, that's one of the nice things about Corncrake, which is another Beowulf thing, or Beowulf supported thing, where it's all short stories, so I don't have to commit to like an epic tale. It can be its own sort of standalone thing, and ship it off and let the Corncrake lady take it out.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
it's kind of nice. So another question for you: how has your life been since becoming involved compared to before? Like, is it the same? Has it gotten more enlightening, or what do you think?
So, I mean, there's layers here.
Hmm.
One of the things that it helped me do is it helped me stop talking to normal people about politics.
Yeah.
Um, so, like I told you, interested in I've been interested in reading about reactionary politics for a very long time.
Hmm.
Um, and there's a period between sort of 2010 and early 2020 where I would get myself in trouble socially because, you know, um,
Would reveal your power level.
yeah, exactly. And, you know, this is just not that advisable in Canada, and it's not productive particularly either. Um, the One of the things that you come to realize pretty quickly as you start to understand elite theory and its implications is that most people should not should not most people don't understand politics and most people should not be spending their time trying to understand politics. So
Hmm.
having a discussion about how politics actually works with most people is a counterproductive waste of time, and all it does is signal to them that you're not like them.
Like signals that you sort of, in a way, there's a risk you could signal that you're an enemy.
Yeah, it's a risk you could signal you're an enemy, but also you just make yourself an like so if you go into like a regular social scenario and try to explain to somebody that Canadian politics is that official Canadian politics divided by parties is kind of fake, and that Canadian politics is actually dominated by a series of uh, regional interests um, that have political parties, but the political parties are fundamentally interested in advancing the interests of the elites they represent,
Hmm.
rather than particularly being ideological. That's not like a statement which identifies you as an enemy to a normal person. It's a statement they won't understand.
Hmm.
It's a statement that they kind of instinctively disagree with because all the messaging around them tells them that that's not true. And it's
Hmm.
a statement made at a kind of level of analysis that they're not used to. And it's not socially conducive to try to have that discussion.
Hmm.
You're much better to talk to that person about something that they actually know about. Um,
Like sports ball.
you know,
Yes.
I talk to the people at my church about like I don't know how to fix my. I mean, I raise chickens in the backyard. I talk to them about it all the time because they know about that stuff and I don't, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, I've got a project. I'm renovating my basement at the moment. It turns out that I know a little bit about how to drywall, but there's lots they can teach me about it. Um, you're just much better to talk to people about things that they actually know something about than to try to um, have a conversation about politics because you need to talk about it.
Yeah, you're not gonna red pill the normies like or the
No,
uh,
and you
beyond
shouldn't
normies.
like you shouldn't want to because imagine a society entirely composed of people who are like deeply interested in the mechanisms of politics. That's a terrible society.
And you can imagine too all those sort of manager type people just thinking of ways to like make your life horrible.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, since you mentioned it, do you think you could talk about the different divisions in Canada in terms of like, power struggle? Like we have like the Western elites. I remember you talking about,
Yeah, I
and the
mean
Laurentians.
it's I mean the Canadian politics is has three dominant elite factions. It has the Laurentian elite, which are kind of the ruling party, and
Hmm.
their power base comes from, the strip between Toronto and Montreal. Um, there's the Western Canadian elites, who, you know, had HQ is Calgary, and their wealth and power comes from the oil and resource industries,
Hmm.
oil and ag, basically. You have the Quebec nationalists, who, you know, uh, have like they haven't they're ethno nationalists who kind of cloak it in cultural and linguistic terms.
Hmm.
And then there's a cut. Those are kind of the three dominant groups that drive Canadian politics, and then there's a bunch of smaller factions. So,
Clientele.
well, not just clients, right?
Mm.
So it's not correct to view the sort of Chinese community in Canada as a client community
Hmm.
of, but they're a subdominant faction in Canadian politics,
Yeah,
right?
like the Khalistani Sikhs and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. The Khalistani Sikhs are not properly like the Liberal Party kind of views them as clients, but that's not a. I don't believe that the Laurentian elite are correct to view these people as their clients
Yeah.
because their political orientation faces a completely different way, right?
Hmm. That makes sense. What do you see for like if well actually let's go to the next question. What do you envision for Canada's future? Like, I guess this would be related to that in some sense,
I
because
mean,
obviously there's been pull and push.
yeah, so there's been very strong anti-centralization pushes in Canada as a result of. Uh, so you can think of Confederation as a vehicle through which the Laurentian elite have wielded power since 1867,
Hmm.
and they've wielded power through a lot of very dramatic changes in this country over that period. Um, and you know, I often remark the Liberal Party of Canada was in power in more years in the 20th century in Canada than the Communist Party was in the USSR.
Yeah.
Um, so they've done a very effective job of holding on to formal and informal power through all of those transitions, um, using the vehicle of Confederation and all of the kind of different levers that are associated with it. In the period since Trudeau the Younger has been in power, they've really kind of pushed that vehicle to its absolute limit to the point where you have, pretty aggressive, um, either secessionist or um, soft secessionist movements in both the West and in Quebec.
Hmm.
Um, you have the PQ, uh, as part of their manifesto, looking at putting a referendum for secession for Quebec on the ballot here in the next couple of years. Um, Reminder to the audience that Quebec was within I think, three percentage points of seceding the last time they got to a referendum in the 90s.
Hmm. It's
So
very close.
it's very possible that if they manage that, they will have the votes for secession. Um, and you have Western Canada using the vehicle of the three provincial governments out there to engage in nullification on the carbon tax, to engage in um, a number of projects to reclaim power inside the vehicle of the provincial governments away from the vehicle of Confederation and kind of undermine the Laurentian control of the country.
Hmm. It
So,
it is funny how like BC tried to play along with the like Trudeau government, but then they just sort of got they but even despite that, they didn't get treated well. They were expecting to have more of a voice with the East, and
well,
they just got kicked to the side. I mean, I saw it coming from a mile away, but
yeah, I mean, I don't think that the BC sort of people from British Columbia know at some level that they're an afterthought in Canadian politics. I don't think they know just how completely irrelevant they are.
yeah,
Um, they're like a really bad problem in the scenario where the country breaks up because there's no obvious, just like the Maritimes, there's no obvious um, future for these people. Uh, but none of the three dominant elite factions in Canadian politics cares at all what happens in British Columbia. Um, like not even a little bit.
that's why I was kind of hoping like we'd have like some sort of like British Columbia Caesar that like stands up and says like, "Hey, us too," or I don't know, because
Well,
we're out here on the coast being like, "Hey, we're still here," and all we really have is Vancouver and Victoria, and everything
yeah.
else is just rural. But actually, most of BC is conservative
Well,
by land area, but
I mean, the issue with BC is you've got this like the the actual wealth generating industry is kind of dominated by foreign interest. So there
mhm.
isn't much nexus around which any kind of political interest could consolidate.
Yeah,
So
it's true. There's so
I,
many Chinese and Indians and stuff and Filipinos. The Filipinos are great, but I mean like, uh,
but they don't have local political interest. They're just kind of living their life, right?
yeah, yeah, they're just sort of surviving.
Um, and like even the I think Chinese there who have a little bit more political consciousness are not. It's not political consciousness related to Canadian politics.
Yeah, they have sort of a racial interest. Like they have their own apps and stuff. Based like you can't really download them if you're Canadian.
Yeah,
They have like special Uber taxis that are like cheaper for Chinese, but they charge you like the different. They charge you the white rate, right?
yeah,
Actually, here's crazy. When I was young, I worked in like the city services industry, and I worked in Burnaby and Vancouver, the Vancouver area, like Greater Vancouver,
yeah.
and some of the areas where you go to, it's like a really big Filipino or Chinese or Indian. You'd open up the sewer grate and you go in there with your inspection camera, and the whole sewer is just filled with like bloated rice, just completely packed. And
Oh,
then they'd have to
jeez.
send these like these what do you call rotor hoses down,
Yeah.
and they would like shoot them down, and then like it would spray all the rice out, and like it was crazy. Like I was like, I guess I have some. Is this my bias is confirmed? Like what's going on here?
Yeah.
Oh
Well, I mean, to kind of turn it around to the original question,
yeah.
because there are these problem populations that don't allow for an elegant breakup of the country, or would make an elegant breakup of the country more difficult, my view is that the most likely outcome for Canada is a kind of is a scenario where the provincial governments end up with a lot more power than they have now, and you
Hmm.
have this kind of decapitated federal government that doesn't really do a lot. Um,
Like a rump.
exactly, kind of like the kind of like the EU government is, where um, the EU government has a lot of kind of on paper authority,
Hmm.
but you saw during COVID exactly how irrelevant it is. It turns out all those borders that are passable on EU passports, turns out they can all go back up in 5 minutes if they want them to.
Hmm.
Um, and in the same way, and whatever EU law is, it turns out that national governments have control of all the armies. So if it really matters, uh, the regs don't matter. The EU regs only matter when you have an elite that wants to cooperate with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're going to end up in a place where, because the Canadian federal government doesn't really have, I mean, the only piece of leverage they really have left is that they control the RCMP, and the RCMP is the provincial police in many provinces. But
Mm-hmm.
my guess is that by the end of the decade, that won't be true anymore, and they will literally have no force at their disposal, uh, combined with the fact that they don't have very much money. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it's going to be harder and harder for them to keep control of the country.
I think even BC was looking into getting their own provincial police. They would be the third province to do it, I believe.
Well, I think if Alberta rejects the RCMP as their provincial police, which they're looking hard at right now,
Mm.
I think you'll see a cascade. I think you'll see the RCMP basically wiped from provincial duties.
Well, actually, now think about it, I think Newfoundland does too. They have the constabulary. They don't have the RCMP, so
That's right.
that would be we'd almost be half the provinces if Alberta and BC jumped on board.
Well, and because of um, a large collection of events during the Trudeau government's reign,
Yeah,
there's a lot of anti-RCMP sentiment in pretty much every province in the country.
yeah.
Um, so, I mean, the RCMP is going to continue to exist because they've got Border Patrol and they've got the territories who you know, well, uh, none of it is not going to have provincial police anytime soon.
And that's kind of
But
what they were for, right? The RCMP are supposed to be for like they're sort of like uh,
yeah, they're supposed to be for the territories.
the frontiers, not for the
So
governing. You know.
they're only the provincial police in places like BC and Alberta by contract. So the
Hmm.
provincial government pays Ottawa to have them do this function. But I mean, in a future where there's a hostile relationship between the provinces and the feds, that system has no future.
Hmm.
So I don't see any situation where Ottawa doesn't end up um, like the only situation where Ottawa is able to restore its power is you have Polyev come in with a supermajority and kind of reform the system. But
Hmm.
I just I find it very very hard to believe that he's prepared to do the kinds of things that are gonna put him in a position where his government ends up any different than the Harper government ended up.
Actually, that brings me to the next question. Actually, why is the CPC so easily subverted? Like as you're saying, they would have to do quite a bit of reform to sort of change things. And what do you think? Do you think they're just going to end up being like going soft on everything?
Well, I mean, they've got two really big problems. First, they have the wrong friends in the U.S.
Hmm.
So all of the professional class that comes to Canada from the U.S., who that part of our professional class is profoundly influential,
Hmm.
are um, are gonna side against them politically, um, and without any real fear of them. And second, um, because of the way that the Canadian politics is oriented compared to U.S. politics, all of the academic and civil service institutions are organized in a way that's hostile to them.
Mm.
Um, and the CPC have so far totally failed to make alliance with the French Canadian element of the civil service. So, like, there's two factions in the civil service. There's the Laurentian civil service and there's the French Canadian civil service, and both of them hate the CPC.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
So it's not. They would have to basically they'd have to build a new government from the ground up, which is kind of what Harper sort of threatened. Like, Harper's branding for the CPC government was that it was Canada's new government, um, and he kind of signaled that he was going to try to build a new government from the ground up, but he just didn't tear down nearly enough. I
Hmm.
mean, if you were to kind of take that project on, you basically have to burn academia to the ground, and you have to fire everyone who currently works
Figurative,
for the federal government.
figuratively speaking.
And not only that, you have to completely purge the judiciary and
Oh
not
yeah.
hire people who went to Canadian law schools. Like, it was during the Harper government that Trinity Western University was having its law program disaccredited for having a code of conduct that, uh, you know, instantiated a traditional Christian view of appropriate sexual ethics.
Hmm.
Um, so, like the Canadian legal system is way more far gone in terms of capture by one segment of the elite than I think maybe the UK has a legal system that's this far gone, but
Mm.
it's like 97-3 in terms of split in elite loyalties,
Yeah.
something like that.
I was talking to if you heard of Fortisax, shout
Yeah.
out to Fortisax. He lives in the same city as I do, and I was out with him one day, and he was saying, I don't know if this is true. Maybe you could tell me if it's true. He said that like the law and like you have precedent and
Yeah.
like common law, and he said that all the precedent before 1980 was it 82 we signed
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
that was all thrown out, and so the courts are basically sort of a lot of the sort of liberal justices just sort of make things up when they do
Yeah.
rulings.
Yeah.
And I mean the way things go, like I mentioned this before, but like the way the charter is, I mean, you know what I think about the charter, but
Well, we've
uh,
got like there's layers here because we've got parallel legal systems as well,
mm,
right? We have the charter courts and we have the real courts. Um,
yeah, what's the Human Rights Tribunal?
yeah, well, every province has one, and there's a federal. I think we have 11 human rights tribunals in this country.
Oh, my brother owns a restaurant. He hired a trans individual,
Yeah,
and he fired him just because he was. I don't know if it was he or her, but anyways, they were a bad employee. So he fired him just like anybody else. He wasn't being discriminatory, but then they sued him anyways
yeah.
and brought him. They're bringing him to the Human Rights Tribunal, and
Well, I mean, he has no chance.
yeah, well, he's basically like realizing he's gonna have to settle and stuff, and it's just like just terrible. It's too bad though because I did warn him, but oh well.
What's the Scott Adams solution again?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, uh, redacted. Um, yeah. So anyway, I was thinking like if they haven't set for the real legal, well, quote unquote real legal system where you're supposed to follow precedent, not the human rights kangaroo courts. Which funny, like if you had like a when it comes to bodily autonomy for those kangaroo courts, if you're trans, okay, cool, they always rule in your favor. But if you didn't want to get the shot and you lost your job and lost your house and all this stuff and you got like financially destitute,
Yeah,
they would be like, oh, it's your fault.
yeah.
You're the baddie, right? So it's literally just friend enemy at that point.
No, I
Um,
mean nobody should fool themselves. These are like 97-3 split in terms of elite loyalty courts, and they don't care about what the law says. They just don't.
yeah. Well, like we had like Bonnie Henry out here. I think she's like the prevent. She just it's like today, she just dropped the mandate for nurses and doctors to not have to get the
Yeah.
shot. Like
Well,
just today.
and it was kind of only in a backhanded way because she declared an end to the COVID emergency.
Yeah, like wait, 2 years late. Well, I think the whole thing was crap, but like 2 years late, right, from everybody
Yeah.
else. Like that's just crazy. It's crazy. Like she's just like this bureaucrat that's been given too much power.
Yeah. And but I mean in Canada, the courts in Canada are not sovereign in the way that they are in other countries to begin with. But
Mm-hmm.
even putting that issue aside, um, so like you'll get kind of this boomer sort of U.S. copy where older people will think that the court is that like the Canadian courts are going to restrain the federal government. But I mean, we have the notwithstanding clause. It does not matter at all what the courts say
Mm-hmm.
if Parliament has a view. But on top of that, we have like the most ideological courts. I think. I mean, maybe somewhere else has more ideological courts, but
I don't think there. Maybe like in a communist country. I don't think anywhere that's like what you call Western civilization. I don't think there's anything like that here.
no. I mean, they work pretty well at the level of property law, and that's about the highest level you can rise to, and have our courts still work. So
Yeah.
that's what I say. Like, if you're the CPC and you want to kind of get to kind of baseline reform, even you basically have to burn that entire system to the water line and start over again. And
Hmm.
you have to find people to staff an alternate system. Um, but who are you going to get to staff an alternate system?
Hmm.
Um,
That's
the like
difficult.
the entire academic system has been on the other side of this for like what is it, 65, 70 years at this point? Like,
Well, what if we did a Curtis Yarvin and just like retire all the bureaucrats and managers?
well, I
Um,
mean, that's fine, but who are you going to hire to do all that?
your friends. I'm not sure.
We're gonna have a Canadian government of like 8,000 employees running the whole country.
We could probably do it.
Yeah, I mean,
Just gotta streamline things, you know. I don't
yeah,
know. There is a lot of bloat in the federal government, that's for sure. But I think
yeah.
when as you get bigger, right, the things get less and less efficient.
Well, I mean, uh, this is one of the like, if I was actually, became Emperor of Canada tomorrow, the first thing I would do is break it up because it's like a completely unmanageable polity.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I'd be putting like I'd like declare I'd like put like a lord and a baron over here, and it would
yeah.
be like separate the powers so I kind of have to deal with it.
Well,
It'd be
I
great.
mean, my long-standing going. This goes back to my time in university, but when I was in university, I proposed forcing all Native American tribes to declare independence. Um, because there's this whole structure in Canada where uh, Native Americans have special status as citizens. They get
Hmm.
all these benefits. So I said to a professor at the time, well, just cede the territory and get rid of them. Um, and like, no, we don't want actual independence. We want fake independence where you give us money.
Well, actually, I kind of thought that might be a good way to like solve the problem is as well. Like out in BC, we have they have treaties with the natives and they get like
Yeah,
reserves and stuff. I
yeah.
was thinking like, and then in certain cities they'll always city meetings they'll like recognize like whose land they're on or whatever.
Well, at a basic level, you can't have two classes of citizen like that.
Hmm.
So you have to actually the progressive side does not want to resolve those conflicts because it leverages power out of those conflicts, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah,
S-
obviously. But
So
yeah, go
the,
ahead.
the the way to solve this problem is to say, uh, is to say to these people like, you want this random patch of land in northern BC that nobody cares about? Okay, it's yours. There's your sovereign country. Um,
Well, I was
we'll,
gonna go.
we're
I was
closing
gonna.
we're closing the border and good luck.
Yeah. See ya. You throw them the keys.
Yeah,
See ya.
exactly. And it turns out that all those land claims will dry up instantly because none of these people actually want to leave Canada.
They'll be like that meme with the guy saying like "Let me in," like on the
Yeah,
fence.
exactly, exactly.
Well, I was gonna actually go more extreme, and say like you know when they say like say City of Victoria for example,
Yeah,
before they have a meeting because they're very progressive over here. They'll say like, okay, well we recognize this is the land of the Lekwungen peoples and or whatever. And I'm like, okay,
yeah,
cool. Now, if you really so what they're essentially doing is they're trying to say like we're sorry like we took all your land.
yeah.
Like if I go to you like if I go up to you and I steal your bike and I take your bike and I'm riding around with it. And a couple weeks later, I come by. I'm like, "Hey, I'm sorry I stole your bike. I'm on the bike right now. I'm just like riding it." And then you're like,
You do
"Okay,
a bike theft acknowledgement.
yeah, yeah." So it's like the only way you can really make that true, like the apology actually real, is like give the bike back to them,
Yeah,
like in that situation. So I'm saying like, so okay, so I'm not like I'm not a landowner here because like it's
yeah,
just so expensive. I actually I rent land,
There you go.
ironically from natives. So this would obviously not affect me. But what I'm saying, all the land in BC should be given back to the native tribes. All of it, all for all the rich people with these mansions. It's all theirs. It's all the natives now. Now you
Yeah.
pay taxes to the natives, and they're going to run everything. And now where's the grievance? The grievance is gone. Now we're ruled by natives, like a super like the Firewater
Yeah,
Confederacy.
that'll last about 10 minutes.
Exactly, and then I would solve that problem, right? Then we could clear that out. But that,
Sorry,
that whole
two more generations and it'll be stolen land again. All right.
they stole it. But yeah, it's I just kind of think like if we could just, because that would really piss off all this Chinese billionaires that like what put all their money here, because it's not safe
Well,
in China.
it's all there specifically because they think Canadian law is like very stable, and there's this
Yeah,
long-standing tradition of protecting property rights. I don't think they realize how close Canada is to becoming just like none of these people understand what Canada was like before 1980.
yeah,
Like nobody remembers that Canada was like very very nearly Venezuela and confiscated. So like during Trudeau the Elder's reign, there's this thing called the NEP, where the basic strategy behind the NEP was to turn Canada into Venezuela, right? Where the government owns all of the oil production facilities and manages the price of distribution so that everybody locally gets like massively discounted gas, and the government runs its finances by selling oil internationally.
hmm
But unfortunately, not only did Trudeau run into other problems because he had to get busy and shoot some French Canadians, but he also did this right at the end of the oil crisis. So immediately after he seized the assets, the price of oil fell out of bed, and the assets were worth like a tenth of what he paid for them at best.
yeah.
So we didn't end up becoming Venezuela, and the federal government lost a lot of money trying to make us into it. But I don't think most people realize how close we were to just being like uh, a tin pot Latin American dictatorship, but with icicles instead.
Yeah, yeah. That reminds me of some of my crypto moves.
Yeah, it's
Fly right at the top,
yeah.
What was I gonna say? Yeah, I mean,
You should thank some French Canadian terrorists for making sure that Trudeau didn't get to remain the first time. So
thank you, freedom fighters. Mashallah. Let's see here. Okay, well, let's get some new questions on here.
sure.
First, this is actually the last question I was going to ask. I'll ask it now. Why do so many Canadians have are they driven by like a slave morality? Like, why are they so at least like virtue signaling in that direction? What do you think it derives from?
There's so many answers to this question, and none of them are definitive.
Perfect.
I mean, Canadians have been highly conformist to authority for I'm talking about Anglo Canadians now, going back a very very long way. Um,
hmm
one of the pieces of history I often cite is that Toronto's nickname used to be Toronto the Good because it had the lowest crime rate of any like North American city, and these like absurdly high rates of church attendance, upwards of like 85 or 90% on a weekly basis.
What
So
changed? Or when did that change?
that changed in the 50s.
I was wondering because my family, they used to own the transit system in Toronto before it got nationalized during the war.
Yeah, okay.
The Wilson family.
Yep.
I mean, that's not my name now, but was one of my branches.
Ancestors, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, now I don't know. Now, if you ever see Wilson bus lines, that's like my family, I guess.
Yeah,
I didn't get anything from it, but
the history of the TTC is kind of interesting because it's anyways, that's a whole. I don't know enough about it to talk about that on a podcast, but it's quite an interesting story.
Hmm.
Uh, but like broadly speaking, the Cultural Revolution happened in the U.S., and at the same time that that happened, there was a very deliberate and very kind of out in the open elite effort to take Canada out of the British sphere of influence and put it in the American sphere of influence.
Mm.
And when that effort occurred, we got a new flag, we got a new national anthem, we got a new. We started pretending 1867 was the birth date of Canada. We
Yeah.
made up like our own Independence Day to go with it, which was pretty fun. Um, what else did we get? We got like a new government structure. We got a new immigration policy. And we got a new status game where instead of trying to LARP as Victorian British aristocrats, everyone tried to become an American,
Hmm.
like businessman. And in that, and not, and the other thing that happened is the martial class got demoted from the head of society to kind of the toilet paper of society,
Hmm.
and the and instead the kind of business part of the Laurentian elite grabbed power. And in that transition, a lot of things happened. But one of them was that Toronto the Good was over basically overnight.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. There was it wasn't to do with immigration at all, I guess, because it was the 50s. That came after.
Well,
Um,
but I mean, the 50s was a huge decade for immigration for Canada,
mm,
where the old Anglo stock of the country was flooded with European immigrants. You know,
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
um,
after the war.
yes, all the Dutch people, all the French people, all the German people, all of the Italians, um, all the places that the Allies conquered. We created displaced persons, and many of them ended up in Canada. And
Hmm.
all of them were told the new story about what Canada was rather than the old story. Um, to the point where, like, if you ask people in my wife's family who's the head of state for Canada, they won't realize that it's the king, right?
Hmm. Yeah, they always think it's the prime minister or something.
Yeah, yeah. Like they don't know the governor general is like this obscure office that doesn't make any sense to them. Like they don't have any connection to that older British nation. It just doesn't exist for them
Hmm.
because by the time their family got here, these are even like very old people. By the time their family got here, the propaganda had all changed.
I remember I heard stories about people from 1867 when we got quote independence.
Yeah,
They were like, well, "What do you mean we're living in Canada now? Like they're British subjects in their mind."
yeah,
Then and in some senses they sort of lost a lot of their like mobility. Well, I guess they haven't really because they haven't taken away, but it was easier to travel back then. You didn't really need a passport. You were just a British subject and you basically go anywhere.
yeah. Well, as a British subject in Canada, you could go anywhere in the Empire, and you could, at that time, you could just walk across the border into the U.S. and
Yeah,
that was fine.
exactly. Yeah.
Um,
My grandparents they lived on the border. Not well, just north of in Canada, obviously, but just like it was called Zero Avenue,
yep.
and they lived just on the other side of like across the road. And we'd like walk the dog, and he'd be like going in the ditch, and then he'd like cross and start running across the road in the United States, and we're like, oh, come back, he wants to look at the cows or whatever. But then my grandma, she was American, so she could just go and not worry about it. Technically, it was an illegal crossing, I guess, but I mean,
Yeah.
the dog was running away.
Well, I mean, many Canadian towns were just like built with the border right in the middle of them because
Yeah.
at that time, you I mean, there's so many layers to this. During the war, there was a program where captured German U-boat crews were warehoused in Canada,
Hmm.
um, and there's no way you can escape from Canada back to Germany. But on the weekends, the guards would lend the prisoners rifles so they could go hunting in the surrounding. They were up in northern Ontario. They just you know You want to
Hmm.
go deer hunting? Here's a rifle. You know, come back at the before the end of the weekend. It's just like a totally different kind of society where um, the kind of the level of discretion given to the people kind of at the end point was much higher.
Hmm.
Instead of we now live in a very centralized, very administrative society.
Well, I remember not there's like an old military base that's like a park now by my
Yep.
house. When I was growing up, and you could go there and we play like army and cops and robbers or whatever have like these like cap guns,
Yeah.
little plastic guns, and I'd like rip off the orange tip because I thought it looked really gay, and
Yeah.
then I do know it would look more real, and we go like pew pew, shooting each other and stuff, and but nowadays I'm like actually worried that if I send my kids, bless you, when I send my kids down there, if they were to do the same thing, like some
Well, they
idiot
get
would,
arrested.
yeah, they get arrested for like scaring someone, like it's just because of feelings. It's nothing. It's a kid with a cap gun going pew pew, like,
Yeah.
and that's one thing that is, I don't know how to change that. Like, I'm actually considering running for office in 2 years locally, just for things like that, because like I want kids to be able to go play army in the old army base. It's just like it's fun.
Yeah. Well, and uh, I mean, I talked about this on Twitter. Like, I volunteer. My oldest kid is old enough to be playing baseball this year, and so I volunteered with the baseball league.
Hmm.
Um, and the extent to which all of those little local institutions are captured by just the absolute like most.
Obese. I saw that pic. I saw that picture.
I mean, they're like they're it's a certain kind of middle-aged woman for
Hmm.
whom the absolute worst thing that could possibly happen is for some kid to either like scrape their knee or get their feelings hurt.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
you know, you can live that way as like a 45-year-old woman. That can be your set of priorities, but you can't that's like the worst possible way to raise a child.
yeah, they got to get some scrapes and deal with it. You know,
Yeah, and they gotta have some
resilience.
times where their feelings get hurt, and that's part of it, right?
Yeah. Steel yourself.
Yeah.
Here, I got another question for you. This is a little bit longer. What advice would you give to young men today, especially Canadians, I suppose,
Yeah.
for relationships, masculinity, traditionalism versus like progressive ideals?
Yeah, so the number one piece of advice that I would give to young men is that, um, particularly in Canada, but in most European countries as well, um, the DEI apparatus is going to deprive you of opportunities so aggressively in institutional life that you have really, really strong incentives to want to operate in the entrepreneurial world rather than operate in the kind of institutional world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so get your head around that as like an 18-year-old that you're going to have to go and make your money. You're not going to go and get a degree and then get placed into the institution and have somebody spoon feed you for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's not going to work out for you. Or if it does work out for you, it's going to be so far below your level of competence that it's going to be a kind of human tragedy. Um, so make that mindset shift as early as possible, so that you can kind of cultivate the skills and cultivate the social networks required to operate in that world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, I look at um, the sort of Christian subculture in which I live. None of those people went to university and got an institutional job. All those people work for little construction businesses, little like uh, little trades business, tool and die businesses, um, all those little blue collar businesses, and many of them are enormously financially successful at it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so if you're like both not a moron and willing to kind of work hard in trades businesses, there's tremendous opportunity. So that's kind of and tremendous opportunity for people who are not just called to be work with their hands people. Like you could get to 40 and run a business with like, 40, 50, 60 people working under you if you're capable.
Hmm.
So if you kind of get your head around the idea that you're going to have to make your own institution rather than getting yourself placed within an institution, that mindset change I think is going to serve you really, really well in the years ahead.
I think
Um,
that's definitely a good idea. Like I hope like what do you think the value is for like a young man if they're like quite young, don't really know what they're doing, in like getting an LLC just to like experiment with things.
well, I mean, if you screw up when you're 18 in terms of business, like who cares? It's
Mm,
a good entry on your resume.
yeah.
So I think there's like you don't my view is that you should first attempt to get a few skills and then start to look at trans, tran, translating those skills into a business.
Hmm.
Um, but if if you get ahead of yourself and make some mistakes in business when you're young, like okay, um, that's not a big deal. If you're 22 and you have to go back and live with your parents because your business failed, like who cares?
Yeah, exactly. That's perfect time to do it.
So that I mean, my view is to go is that you should go out and take some risks when you're that age, and um, understand that that's going to be requisite for passing through this moment. Like the kind of low variance strategy of just following the institutional path that's laid at your feet. Some people will make it through that path, but your odds are not good. So
Hmm.
you might as well roll the dice a little bit, um, or if you're not constitutionally inclined towards running a business, go and find a good partner that you can be a second in command to, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's
Develop your relationships, like your friendships, and um,
exactly like another thing that I think is fundamentally different for this generation of Canadians than the generation that came before is the value of the communities that they can be a part of. Um, if you were a boomer in this nation, you had a bunch of opportunities laid at your feet that didn't require, like deepen, that didn't require being able to leverage all the relationships in your community. But
mhm.
that's just not the reality you're gonna live in as a young man in this country. So you gotta go and build build like part of thinking like an entrepreneur is thinking about building a, a Rolodex of relationships that you can leverage, right?
Mhm. And that's interesting because like, there's in some sense, like, as they say, like, like in the was it the it's not is it the Bible where it says, "It's really hard for a wealthy man to pass through the eye of a needle." But I guess everyone that passes through this narrowing, gorge of, opportunity, like, they're gonna end up quite successful, the ones that do.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so that it should be a bright future for people that are able to do it.
yeah. I mean, they're like, um, I mean, my view is that the historical moment that we're moving through is gonna have like a double bottleneck. There's gonna be a bottleneck where there are a lot of people who make choices that cause them not to pass through on the
Mhm.
front end. Choices like not forming a family, not having children, um, not not remaining rooted in the community, not continuing their culture, etc. And that's happening right now. You can see bloodlines ending all around you.
Mhm.
If you're thinking about it from a Darwinian perspective, you're in the middle of a mass casualty event, right?
Mhm.
Uh, but there's going to be the other end of this bottleneck as well, which is going to be the hardship end of it, right? So one of the consequences of declining empire, declining global trade, declining competence in the country is going to be that you're going to move from a world where we have kind of fake poverty in Canada to a world where we have real poverty. And Canada's a really rough place to be genuinely poor. Um,
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
not
where
not
where
warm.
where you are, it's not quite as bad, but like
Yeah.
most of Canada is a really, really rough place to live that way. Um, and you're going to have to pass through that part of it as well. Um, and so part of the reason I advise young people to go out and get kind of entrepreneurial skills um, is you're going to have dramatic changes. If you're 20 today, I believe you'll probably live beyond the end of the American Empire. You're going to have to live through that moment, and it's going to be rough. And you're going to have to, you know, my great grandfather became a millionaire during the Depression because he was in the vinegar business, and everybody had to can food.
Well,
Um, so there's always there's always opportunities even in hardship. You just um, uh, not everybody's gonna realize them. Lots of people are gonna be left along the way, but that doesn't the fact that there's gonna be casualties along the way doesn't excuse not giving it the best shot you can, right?
plus, like, if you see it coming, you can prepare yourself, and if you know it's going to happen, if you know things are going to change or get worse, like you have your opportunity now to make the best of things and set up some shots in the future, rather than just sitting around like playing Call of Duty or
Well,
you know
just move
eating
yourself
Cheetos.
from like a 0% probability of success to like something that's not zero.
Yeah.
The best that you can, right?
Hmm.
Um, and people will call that like bootstraps advice, but let's be real. Like,
If you're on welfare right now, you're looking for the like, it's guillotine time
yeah,
in like 50 years. Like, don't get your head in the guillotine. Like,
yeah, exactly. Get yourself out of this position, right?
yeah, like you don't want to be reliant on the state, or you want to be reliant on yourself.
Yeah.
And
So
what about relationships for I guess so, for the guys, I guess for the ladies.
yeah, I mean, this is an area where my experience is really quite different than
Mm-hmm.
a lot of other people. So from a pretty early age, I was quite um, embedded into. Uh, in Southern Ontario, we have a relatively insular, kind of reformed Christian subculture, and as a Christian subculture, that has pretty high walls with the outside world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, even as a teenager, more than 90% of my friends were inside that community, and that was pretty normal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, inside that world, my wife and I met my wife when she was 18 and I was 20. We were married within 2 years. Um, she was one of, I guess, three girls that I ever pursued. You know,
Mm-hmm.
all three were well aware that the goal was marriage, and there was like a pretty defined path kind of laid in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Do you feel like the same path is going to be available for your children
a
when they
hundred
get to
percent,
the age? Oh,
a
good.
100%. Um, One of the consequences of the broad culture becoming in Canada becoming more and more hostile to genuine Christians is that the walls between that community and the broad culture are getting higher and higher. So um, you kind of can't enter and you kind of can't leave, um, which means that you kind of the social conventions that exist inside go from sort of optional to they become less and less optional
Mm-hmm.
um, as time goes on. So I fully expect my children to have much the same experience as I did um, inside that community. The only issue with it is you know you more and more limit your economic opportunities by being part of it, which is for men that's a problem, right?
Mm. Well,
Um,
men can always go out outside the community to work, I suppose, but
well,
yeah. Yeah.
it's hard because you face pretty aggressive employment discrimination in Canada, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So it's not an easy thing. So, I mean, my relationship views are very colored by like I have a certain set of views for people who live inside those communities, and you know that view is basically, as a young man, deliver yourself to economic self-sufficiency as quickly as possible. Um, and number two, um, prioritize getting married as like something you want to get done before you're 23 or 24. Um, I think there's tremendous value uh, in being young and forming a family together before you uh, go through the before you go through too much of the suffering of life. I think it's very valuable for you and your wife to experience that together instead of experiencing it separately.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Oh, I agree. Yeah.
so kind of put that to one side for probably the majority of your viewers who don't come from a community like that.
Well,
Um,
I definitely did not come from a community like that. I was married when I was 21
you know,
or 20. It didn't work out, but probably because of the way I was, probably the
well,
community I was in.
yeah, I mean, probably you and your wife were not socially conditioned from a young age for a particular model of marriage.
Well, I was, because I had seen my aunts, my grandparents, and such.
Yeah,
My parents were not a good example, but I had my grandparents to look at. And I mean, I tried my best, but you're only one half of an equation.
yeah,
So
no,
yeah,
no, but like, w- this is gonna sound bad to a certain extent, but
it's all
women
good.
really desperately need to have uh, need to receive social rewards from their female peers for doing things the right way.
Hmm.
And if they receive social rewards from their female peers for doing things the wrong way, uh, that's really really subversive to forming a
Hmm.
family, especially at a young age, where like women in the 18 to 25 window are really really subject to peer cues.
Yeah,
Um,
that's where the community comes in. Yeah, unfortunately, we just don't have that here right now. It's just, well, there are religious communities, but they're quite small. Um, they're not like what you describe.
yeah, and so like, what do you do if you're in what I would call the founding generation, where like you want to leave a legacy for your children? Not much of a legacy was left to you.
Hmm.
Um, and the answer to that is very very difficult, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's just
Yeah.
very difficult, right? Uh, I would say that the people who tell you that uh, your wife is going to just conform to the way that you do things, these people are overly optimistic about uh, the strength of their influence.
Hmm.
Um, but there's some truth to what they're saying.
Yeah.
Y-
Well,
y-
I was very like up until say like 2014. I tell you the truth, I was never really left wing,
you know,
but just the way the culture is here, everything's left wing. Like
you
that's
know,
just like the default. But I was always like, when I looked at like my heart of hearts, I'm like, okay, well, actually, I am quite conservative, and eventually I was like, well, I'll just join the BC Conservative Party. I think I joined at one point.
you know,
Um, but my point was saying that is, uh, my wife from Brazil, she comes from a Catholic country,
you know,
so you'd think they're very conservative, but they're pretty liberal. But and she went to university there, so she was kind of like, I guess, encultured in like the liberal ideology. But after a while, she's as I started kind of realizing that I wasn't like a left wing person.
you know,
She kind of started kind of gravitating towards it. I think that's partly sort of bouncing off each other because she came from like the upper classes there, so they're actually quite conservative, other than her university experience. And I think us bouncing off of each other, like ideas, I think that brought me more and more to like the sensible center, let's call it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I also think like um, the there's a sense in which uh, sorry, I've got a kid woken up here. Do you mind
no
if
worries.
I come back in like 2 seconds?
Yeah, no worries. Good. So as I was saying, just while he's gone, um, I think that the difference for me in terms of like the conservatism, it was partially because I got a wife that was from a conservative background, and I think also that it's, like, once you see how shitty things are and by certain policies, like in Brazil, you can't really look away from that. Like you can kind of try to blind yourself to it, and a lot of people do. You see that in Canada, you see that in the UK, and it comes out in policy. Like if you quote statistics in Germany, you can go to jail for that. But yeah, I don't know, I think eventually I came to that realization, and in some sense, it feels like if like I look at the kids in the dating world today, and I'm kind of thinking, I kind of got off on the last helicopter out of Nam, and I hear that a lot from like people my age that are married and have kids. And then I look at because my oldest daughter is going to be 18 uh, in this winter coming up, and I'm thinking I'm looking at the guys in her cohort. I'm just thinking they're kind of gay. Not that like, they're homosexual, but some are. But I mean allegedly, but like some just look like they look effeminate. They're kind of like not mature. I remember being 18 and thinking, well, I had her when I was 18, and I had to kind of like put my boots on, tie them up. You know what I mean? Like these kids, if it's like they're looking at. I think when I was 13, I maybe was like of an equal or maybe even more mature than them. So like it's like everyone's regressed 5 years. Well,
S-
welcome back.
s- Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. So
Yeah,
I was just saying that like I see that because my daughter's gonna turn 18 in this winter coming up,
yeah.
and I see the guys that are in her cohort. And I'm just like, these guys are all like effeminate homos. Like honestly, I don't know. Uh, I'm like, where are my grandkids gonna come from?
Well, I mean, this is the one thing that if you go back to the question about advice to young men, it is easier than ever today to stand above the crowd of young men.
Mm.
Um, and so, like, in a certain sense, don't despair if you can go and make something of yourself.
I gotta find a way to get my daughter in front of Barron Trump.
Yeah.
Like that would be so based.
Oh my goodness. So, I mean, that's my one piece of advice. Like, the opportunities that are available to people who actually are successful in that young cohort are just enormous.
Hmm. That's true. It doesn't take much. You could be like in my I just kind of think like if I could go back in time or
Yeah.
I don't know, like with the knowledge I have now back then, I would be like absolutely slaying today. Like it would be
Yeah.
insane. Like it would be like shooting fish in a barrel.
Well, I
Uh,
have there's a young man that I know who's like he's a tractor mechanic, has a little tractor mechanic business,
yeah,
and he's like, he's like the king of the 25-year-olds.
that's
Uh,
funny. It reminds me of that meme where it has like that guy that's really messed up, but he has a forklift
yeah,
certification, and then like
yeah.
a woman will just marry him.
Like this is how high the bar is, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's really quite easy, and like if you're in like a paused city like Vancouver,
Yeah.
you don't have to stay there. You can go somewhere else. Like the money's good there, but like there's a lot of other problems.
Yeah.
You don't want to raise your kids in downtown Vancouver.
Well, and like not only that, like there's more to life than trying to max out. Like, um,
Yeah.
look at what people who make like $120,000 a year in downtown Vancouver live like. So
Oh,
this like a mid to low tier knowledge worker in downtown Vancouver kind of maxes out at that,
yeah.
and like that's not a good life. Uh,
No.
you'd be better off. to repurpose that 105 IQ and like I don't know, uh, find somewhere where 105 IQ people are doing okay, and
Bus driver in medicine hat.
exactly, like he's got a better life. So,
Yeah,
uh,
that's pretty crazy.
so that's my broad advice to young men. Like go and find a vocation that's actually suitable to your level of intellect. Like if you go and become if you go and um, enter into law and you start competing with uh, and you think about the kind of people who are at the top of that profession, you start competing with them. If you're like a 120 IQ person, you're gonna lose.
Mm-hmm.
You just are. Uh, and it really sucks to be a mid or low tier lawyer. It really does.
Yeah.
You know, you want to be it if you want to be at like the mid or low tier of the financial industry. Those people have really crappy life outcomes. So you don't have to do that if you're like 150 in IQ. You don't have to go to university and get positioned there. Go and do something else.
Start a plumbing company.
Just I mean,
300 bucks for a call out, like you can do 10 call outs a day. That's $3,000 in your pocket.
look around and find somewhere where you can get well rewarded for the skills you actually have instead of trying to climb the status hierarchy of a culture that's falling apart around you.
Mm-hmm.
Like just because your old parents are gonna think that that's like stupid does unfortunately their perceptions here are really really warped by a world that just doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I think boomers are sort of an anomaly. They weren't definitely not the like historical norm.
Well, like, but if you so if you were living in like Sung Dynasty China, right,
Mm-hmm.
maxing out your educational attainment was absolutely the right play, right? Because it got you as far as you could possibly get in the bureaucracy, and getting as far as you could possibly get in the administrative bureaucracy was how you maximized your earnings and
Mm-hmm.
your life opportunities, right? There's many historical societies that are like that. The boomers grew up in one, but that's not the society we're going to live in for the next 100 years. Um, so you have to adapt your thinking away from that because um, like even already the people who are in the middle part of that bureaucracy they're not okay, and it's going to get a lot worse for them.
Yeah, exactly. You want to sort of like we're going to be entering an era of like infrastructure deficit. So
Yeah.
if you can get involved in some sort of infrastructure projects or
Yeah.
industry related to that, that's not a bad career.
I mean,
Or
just look at the things people do in periods of disruption that you know see them well. Um, hard trades are always a good option in periods like that, especially like if you can be the smartest bricklayer uh, in like out of if you're the smartest bricklayer out of 5,000 bricklayers, you really have an advantage, and it's really a lot better situation than if you're the you know 40th percentile lawyer in a team of lawyers. It's a very different thing.
yeah.
But in addition to hard trades, there's a number of other spots that you can kind of locate yourself in periods like that are um, pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Well, hey, we're getting pretty long in the tooth here, I suppose. Before we go, do you have anything that you'd want to say
No,
before we
just
let her go?
follow my Twitter. There's lots of interesting stuff there, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, you too, man. I'll link the Red Ensign in the show after because I forgot to put it on.
Yeah.
Uh, so if you want to go to Substack, check out the Red Ensign. That's a good one. Uh, brought to you by Black Horse. Anyways, but for now, have a good weekend. Have fun with the kids, and thanks for coming. It's been great having you.
All right. Speak to you soon.
Cheers.